Different cultures have end-of-school prom celebrations at different times. It's an important moment in many people's lives, a night declaring the end of a period of growth and education that celebrates them embarking on new journeys as, well, if not fully grown adults, then at least developed teenagers ready for the next stage of their lives. Exactly what a prom is and what it entails depends on many things. The wealth of the local community sets expectations, the age of the debutantes, and I suppose importantly, the proximity of that age to the legal drinking limit of the culture. My own prom was special to me for a range of reasons. It was my first full-fledged date. It was a celebration of 5 years of friendship before some of us went our separate ways. It was the first time I sat inside a limousine and I got to imagine how the richer half lived. But also, my parents had a history of rewarding me for my accomplishments at the end of each school year. Most notably, I've been allowed to buy completely frivolous Jurassic Park Lost World toys in summer 1997 and been able to reenact InGen capturing dinosaurs on my own living room floor. But the end of college was an important milestone for me, because it was the year that I asked for a video game console of my own. At this point, my family had owned a Sega Mega Drive for many years. I'd enjoyed exploring the cartridge back catalogue of the system, even as my friends went on to buy Sony PlayStations and Nintendo 64s. For some reason, I never quite felt the urge to ask for a Sega Saturn. My young mind was aware, at least peripherally, it would be expensive, and so I had to wait for the right game, probably a Sonic game, to come along and justify the money. I'd already played Sonic 3D on the Mega Drive, and though Sonic R looked cool, it wasn't the same. The Sega Saturn lived and died, and I would only experience these moments from the sidelines, and overall, my interest in gaming consoles temporarily died with it. Real-time strategy games like Command & Conquer Red Alert had me hooked, as did the beguiling sight of Lara Croft in the new Tomb Raider franchise. I had everything I needed on the family computer: sports, action, adventure, while the aging games console still hooked up to the TV in the living room. I even managed to get my fill of platforming games thanks to the phenomenal port of Rayman 2 that my father picked up when we finally accepted that hunting down a copy of Sonic CD was going to be impossible. But my friends were revelling in the PlayStation, Game Boy and N64 experiences, and through them I saw Resident Evil, Crash Bandicoot, Spyro the Dragon, Pokemon, Zelda and GoldenEye, some phenomenal new and old franchises bridging the gap into 3D. But I remember vividly the moment when I saw the first images of Sonic Adventure. I was sat on the floor of my friend's lounge as I leafed through a copy of his gaming magazine, and I stumbled across some photographs of a psychedelic metal skyway vibrant against a bright blue sky. It looked so open compared to the small, cramped 3D worlds I'd seen my friends struggle through. The 5th generation of video game consoles is a technical marvel for what they achieved, but I think the reason I'd flocked towards PC was because these consoles were inherently limited. They were either cramped and small or empty and soulless. This was not. It was vibrant and colourful and expansive. They were some of the first images of a brand new powerful console, this Dreamcast, that I'd ever seen. And there, ready to race down this speedway, refreshed and remodelled to look unlike he had ever had before, was Sonic the Hedgehog. He was back, brighter and more vibrant than ever. But I never dared ask for a Dreamcast at this point. Sonic Adventure was released, and I watched, enraptured by the brilliant images on the internet. Sonic had been redesigned. He'd always been a hedgehog with an attitude, but now he was cooler and even more outspoken than ever before. His bright green eyes were striking. They suited him, it was true, and it should have been a small change in the grand scheme of things, but the artwork seemed designed to draw your attention to it. The reviews were strong, so I had a sudden positive buzz about this franchise, one I hadn't felt in years. I didn't know how long it would take for me to save for a Dreamcast, but I knew I had to experience this somehow. But then Sony struck back by announcing the PlayStation 2, immediately drawing every single one of my friends' attention, and overnight it seemed as though the Dreamcast was doomed to fail. It was immediately apparent that Sony's console would eclipse the Dreamcast. Sega had announced 2 sequels to Sonic Adventure, one a spin-off party game and the other a full-fledged Adventure 2. We had no ideas that this would be one of the last games Sega would release on the Dreamcast as it withdrew from the console market. What I did know was that as the Dreamcast became cheaper, the chances of my parents helping me get my hands on one as I finished secondary school increased. I don't remember going to the shop and buying the Dreamcast on my own copy of Sonic Adventure. I do remember following it though, that I went to school in the morning to say farewell to my friends. I came home, I plugged the system in for the first time, and I played the opening level of Sonic Adventure, reaching the point when you fight Dr. Robotnik for the first time. I won the battle, turned the system off, and then started prepping for the prom and my date in just a few hours' time. I remember the joy of feeling this complete sense of freedom, a moment of relief when the knowledge that the game was just as good as I'd been told. I remember leaving the house and putting Sonic out of my mind as I left to collect my date and the 4 others who would share the limousine with us back to the school hall. We partied, and then we left the school and we carried on partying, and we began drinking, and at no point in that evening did I tell anyone how excited I was to be the new owner of a Sega Dreamcast. I was an adult now, and Sonic was a game ostensibly for children, but I knew it was my little secret to know, and no one else's, that Sonic had grown up just a little alongside me. This was an old friendship with years left in it to come. My personal memories aren't important. What matters is the raw, in-the-moment excitement that Sonic Adventure was able to offer. The momentary burst of hope for the Sonic franchise, and even Sega as a company, as it demonstrated the power of their latest and indeed last console. The Dreamcast was designed to show that Sega was back, that they had learnt from their mistakes since the original Mega Drive release, and that they had a console designed to smash anything that the Nintendo 64 or PlayStation 1 could do out of the gate. The Dreamcast was a revelation compared to those puny consoles, and Sonic Adventure was the launch title that would show just how ambitious Sega could be when they wanted to. This game had everything: hard, fast action, a rocking soundtrack, amazing graphics, multiple playable characters, multiple mini-games, a variable playstyle, complex fully voiced story. Ambitious does not do the team justice. At the time, there was nothing like this, running at even half the speed of this game. And then roll forwards just a few more years to when the game was re-released on the Nintendo GameCube, and then that port was remastered and then re-released on several more consoles again. The world had changed so much in just a few short years. By June 2003, we knew all about the fate of the Dreamcast. Sonic hadn't just heralded the arrival of the console, his sequel had also crowned its death knell. As predicted, the PlayStation 2 hadn't just overshadowed the Dreamcast, it had eclipsed it entirely, going on to become the highest selling console in history. Sega had scattered its development teams across 3 remaining consoles, some franchises on the PlayStation 2, some on the Xbox, and Sonic, for the moment, on the GameCube. SA2 had been an impressive sequel, and though not all the changes were improvements overall, it had been a slicker and brighter package. But the respect hardware of this new generation were a step beyond what the Dreamcast had been capable of, and what was cutting edge in 1999 felt so dated by now. Sonic Adventure 2 had sold well and received generally favourable response in 2002, but the re-release of Sonic Adventure 1 did not go half so smoothly. Sonic Team had tinkered with the game, changing but not improving, definitely not improving, the graphical presentation, introducing some awkward bugs and other overall defects that made the game feel a lot more haphazard and sloppy. It's not fair to blame all of the negative reception on the changes Sega made for the port, although it is in many respects a problematic, inferior translation, one that Sega have sadly stuck with for all of the future re-releases. But I accept the majority of the problems were already there. Just what had changed between the re-releases to make the game feel suddenly so dated? Well, the new generation of consoles had brought competing games just as ambitious but arguably far more well-rounded than Sonic's first true 3D outing. For storytelling prowess, Square Enix delivered Final Fantasy X, and though its voice acting has its own detractors, its focused narrative immediately makes Sonic feel childish and clunky. In the platform arena, Naughty Dog had premiered their own PlayStation 2 franchise with Jak and Daxter, again with an open, vibrant, fully voiced world, with other series such as Ratchet & Clank and Sly Cooper close behind. In other genres, titles like Metal Gear Solid 2 had shown just how immersive this medium could become. On the GameCube and Xbox, similar new franchises were springing up, all far more accomplished than what Sonic Team had been able to pump out before the millennium. Compared to these later titles, which are an entire half generation of consoles with more power to boost later, Sonic Adventure felt immediately dated. It's not that the game is bad, but it is messy. It's far beyond what was possible on the PlayStation 1 or N64, but also far behind what was achievable on the PlayStation 2 and GameCube, and it will inevitably always be far more commonly compared to the latter. The golden age of Sonic Adventure was bright and vibrant. For a short while, this was one of the most important games in the world, but it's also a period with a very brief window. It's a comparison that exists because of how seamlessly Sonic Team adapted their 2D mascot and brought him forwards into the 3D world, but then they never managed to follow that success onto the next console generation. 3D platform video games are difficult beasts, and it took many years for the established formulas to settle into the genre. Time lost whilst other gameplay styles such as stealth, action, and first-person shooter titles began to dominate and replace what had once been the preeminent mode of console gaming. It's a question of perspective. Many people credit Super Mario 64 for being the most seamless example of the old world evolving into polygonal space, but in truth, it's the birth of a whole new sub-franchise. 3D Mario is not the same as 2D Mario, and the two have existed semi-independently ever since. The same applies to Zelda and Metroid, when it would eventually evolve into Metroid Prime years later. Less successful 3D conversions such as Bubsy 3D, Mega Man, Castlevania, and arguably Donkey Kong all show the pitfalls of this transition. I'd still argue that it's Ubisoft's Rayman who made the jump most seamlessly of all, and Rayman 2 was indeed hailed as a classic of the time, but it wore out its welcome quickly, with successive ports to new consoles getting increasingly more scathing reception each time. The joy of Metal Gear Solid, Mario 64, Ocarina of Time is that they laid new foundations that future 3D titles would build on. Both Sons of Liberty, Mario Sunshine and Wind Waker are clear steps up on what their predecessors did, but Sonic Adventure was never built on. It had a sequel, a direct sequel on the same hardware, using the same game engine with many of the same flaws, but for the time Sonic Adventure was designed to close the gap that the previous console generation, the Sega Saturn, had been unable to fill. This wasn't a spin-off or a stranger minigame, it was a true full-blooded beast with something new to say. It was the most ambitious 3D transition of the era, but it arrived just as every other franchise was turning their attention to trimming and refining. As they began to reflect on what had worked and cutting out the elements that didn't, Sonic remained ambitiously raw. I drew attention to that word before now, ambition. In some respects, Sonic Adventure was far too ambitious for its own good. Sonic Team could have produced a better, more streamlined experience if they cut out some of the content and focused on what they had. None of the secondary characters have the depth or joy of Sonic's gameplay. Although there are some solid concepts here, there are also potential misfires. The levels are large and appropriately themed, but there are also a few too many repeating sections or bugs. The camera, programmed in the days before secondary analog sticks were common, is a persistent offender. I admire what Sonic Team did. They attempted to program it to direct the player where they wanted to go. This also robs the game of any sense of freedom. To enjoy Sonic Adventure is not to focus on the small, sloppy elements, but embrace the core experience. The camera is a restriction, but the game is designed to promote forwards movements. You are rarely encouraged to go backwards, but ever onwards. Due to the challenge of programming that sense of speed in a 3D space, the momentum-based gameplay is downplayed in favour of the pure joy of movement. The homing attack was a controversial addition amongst fans at the time, but it absolutely makes sense in terms of allowing Sonic to both target enemies and to briefly accelerate forwards. This is a game with prefixed ideas about where it wants you to go and what it wants you to do when you arrive. And some may find that restrictive, but within the confined limits of the game design, there's a ton of flexibility here in what options you can take. Pre-programmed sections where player control is removed do exist, but they are rare and they're saved for brief moments of spectacle, such as the whale attack in Emerald Coast or sky loops in Windy Valley. Sonic Team went left, whilst most of the platform gaming industry went right. They favoured a heart-pumping experience over player freedom. A potentially controversial choice, but one that I would argue is still held in balance in this game. It's not yet become a racing simulator on legs. It's still a platformer at heart. It seemed almost every other 3D platformer was tending towards collectathon mechanics. There was probably no other way to achieve this. With the available console horsepower at the time, the Sonic team took that approach and they delegated it to a secondary playable character for repeat experiences. That design would not have rewarded Sonic's sense of speed. Instead, they constructed linear obstacle courses, a straight shot from A to B, with numerous challenges and set pieces between the starting and finish line. There's plenty of aerial movement, but with the homing attack and careful enemy placement, you're not watching your shadow to see where Sonic will land, making this one of the least fiddly early platformers out there. There are occasional multiple pathways to choose between, or hidden side areas, but they are nowhere near as plentiful as the old 2D Sonic games. And in this, the franchise did lose something, but it gained in other areas to accommodate this. The one downside, the one impossible flaw that this introduced to the franchise was the abundance of bottomless pits. Almost every level is suspended above the ground or water. The route you follow is a narrow trail that the unwary can slip off of at a moment's notice. One wrong move, the slightest mistaken twitch of the controller, and Sonic will career off the true path and plummet into oblivion. This artificially increases the difficulty, because for a trained player controlling Sonic is incredibly easy, but for a newcomer the minimum level of skill to avoid simply stumbling off the edge of the stage is artificially high. Sonic as a franchise had built its way to the top by being incredibly easy to pick up and play, with exciting but essentially forgiving difficulty system. Previously, no matter how poorly you played, you could survive as long as you held onto one ring. Easy to play, but rewarding to master, with the momentum-based gameplay celebrating skill more than almost any other 2D platformer at the time. But now the unwary, unfamiliar with Sonic speed, have a fairly decent chance of running forwards and just torpedoing the blue hedgehog off a cliff edge. Rings can't save you from that. In other 3D platformer games, for most of the early game at least, missing a jump will mean the player has to backtrack, pull themselves up and try again. For Sonic, missing a jump between platforms means death and a level restart. Lives are plentiful, but player patience may not be. The arrival of bottomless pits would be a franchise staple that I cannot celebrate in this game. I see why it was necessary, but I also lament the loss of wide open areas in the action stages. It does mean that the majority of the game exists in areas of heightened realism. The assault courses rarely feel organic or natural, but artificial in nature. This is in stark contrast to the open world stage hubs that you navigate to cross between levels, which are designed to be as realistic as possible, but are simultaneously both confusing and strangely empty. However, once that threshold of minimum skill level is reached, and the player learns to avoid simply flying off the edges of the stage, you can find a lot of joy in controlling Sonic. That sense of flexible speed, the direct control of his movement can feel addictive. It's why many of the secondary characters appear problematic when compared to the core gameplay of Sonic himself. The game is designed around that sense of movement, not quite momentum, but definitely forwards progression, as you race towards your target. From sunlit beaches, through hurricanes, across snow-capped mountains, or inside erupting volcanoes, through Robotnik's mechanical bases, or the ancient relics of dead civilizations, it's easy to see how this is an evolution of the old franchise. Semi-familiar locations, with a twist, reproduced in vibrant, millennium-quality 3D. Each of the action stages are individual works of art, brief opportunities to experience the thrill of adventure, of racing out into the world, eyes open, and overcoming every obstacle in your way. Had they built these action stages and left it there, I would have been impressed, but Sonic Team's ambition drove them further. Though they have aged, video games of the time rarely had full voice acting, and certainly their production values were non-existent, with terrible direction, but I will always have a soft spot for Ryan Drummond and the rest of the original Sonic cast. Presentation of the opening trailer shows the high bar the team set themselves. Fleeting glimpses of Sonic pelting through the underbrush whilst a demonic force wreaks havoc through the city centre. The in-game engine could never hope to reach this high bar, but there's a joy in seeing how much they tried, how far they pushed themselves towards this lofty goal. It's never going to win awards for acting, but the cast are fully engaged with the material and committed to their roles. I don't like ever declaring something it's so bad it's good, but I can see why people would think that about this game. The camera and the animations are pretty static, The facial expressions are horrifically over-exaggerated, but there's an earnestness to the way that the adventure plays out, and chaos is certainly an intimidating villain. I'm not convinced how keen I am that the game begins with a boss fight rather than an adventure stage, but it does act as an effective prologue for what would follow. I would not say that the larger stage hubs are a complete success. There are a few moments where, without using the red floating orb to effectively cheat and tell you where to go, some future objectives are quite obtuse, but the level of detail Sonic Team were able to load into these areas are incredible for the hardware. The problem with this game, however, is that, largely due to the speed, it only takes a few scant hours for the player to blast Sonic through each of the stages. There is plenty of replay value in revisiting those stages with the 3 missions per stage. However, the core experience is not a long one, and although the end boss against Robotnik is effective, it's not the complete Sonic Adventure experience. Sonic's is the longest, most comprehensive and well-planned portion of the game, but this is an adventure that wants you to replay it again, a second, third, fourth, and more times, from another perspective, as another character to get the complete experience. Taken on its own merit, there is a real pathos here. Look at the climactic action scene here and tell me that Chaos's backstory doesn't compare to what other video game franchises were doing at the time. This is just as well directed and emotive as the best segments in comparable games like Majora's Mask. However, whilst franchises like that tend to take one theme or topic at a time and use it to fill out an entire game, here it's just one ingredient amongst all of the other aspects that Sonic Team were cooking up. Yes, the bizarre, over-expressive facial animations are terribly corny, but so were all of the other platform mascots in this era. Have you seen the original Crash Bandicoot? The N. Sane trilogy has done wonders to Naughty Dog's original PlayStation 1 mascot, and yet it is such a gentle touch-up, fleshing out all of the concepts that were already there. Sega really wanted one game that could have it all: multifaceted story, variable gameplay, modern console-defining graphics. They packed it to the brim with extra content and went far beyond what the average consumer were looking for, and so they cut corners where they could. I think it's a shame that these additional player experiences will forever colour many people's perception of the game. The internet is full of memes about how obnoxious big fishing stages are, but there is also brilliance here that gets overlooked. Tails rewards speedrunning, Knuckles exploration, Amy offers a brief moment of survival horror, and Gamma is a surprisingly competent time trial shooter. As your reward for trying out all of these shorter experiences, there's a final boss. An epic face-off against the great monster that was teased at the very start of the game. Perhaps there should have been a full level though, a chance to replay the glory that was Sonic himself, navigating through the ruined city towards the monster, to remind people how strong the original core Sonic-based gameplay was after suffering through all of these diversions. Lacking this, the end result is unbalanced. These repeat playthroughs should have been seen as variants on the core game, a strong core game, but instead for many people, they overshadow the whole experience. That said, if given the choice, I wouldn't take anything away. Sega had a plan, they had ambition. You can question the elements of the execution, but none of it was conceptually misjudged. In order to prove to the world that Sonic really was back to his glory days, he had to be bigger than ever before. Offer a game deserving of the epic majesty the brand deserved. This really was the perfect adventure for the times. For anyone who's managed to listen to all of that and get through to the end here, thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed it. This was a special 50th retrospective for the channel. There are now 50 episodes of A Friend Remembers. It's taken a year to get here, but I'm so proud of what we've managed to do. So if you've enjoyed this video and you're not subscribed, please do join us. Have a look at what else is available on the channel elsewhere. Sonic Adventure is incredibly important to me for all sorts of reasons. But there's loads of other stuff out there, not just video games, books, movies, loads of cool stuff. I like to look about how we interact with media. I like to look at some of the interesting history and facets that led to its creation, and just generally share cool stuff. So please subscribe, join us for the journey. Please comment and tell me your thoughts about Sonic Adventure and what you agree and disagree with compared to what I said. This is all worth sharing together.